Now, with Daniel 12 is a seamless continuation of the vision that started all the way back in Daniel chapter 10. So in Daniel 10, this angel arrives. Many commentators suggest that angel is Gabriel, although Daniel 10 doesn't say for certain. But the angel begins this message in Daniel 11, verse 2, that is now continuing into Daniel chapter 12. So there really shouldn't be a chapter break. Maybe just for ease of navigation, there is. And for that same reason, I'm splitting it up into a second video. So the vision of Daniel 11 continues as the final tribulation is described as historically unprecedented distress. But in this chapter, in Daniel chapter 12, Daniel is assured of three redemptive factors. Number one, the tribulation's length will be limited to a set time. Number two, prophetic insight will be granted to those who remain faithful, and they will be empowered to resist and make a difference, to preserve people. And number three, even among those who fall, even though there's going to be great amounts of death and destruction, those who fall, everybody has the ultimate hope of resurrection. Resurrection. So as we get into this, I just want to come back and just touch on real quick this little section here of Daniel 11, starting in verse, you could say 29, 30, but really, when we're getting into 31, the angels are really interpreting this section as applying to Antiochus Epiphanes, but also applying to the Antichrist. And so a little bit of what's described, just for review, forces from the Antichrist will come into the temple, and they will take away the regular burnt offering, and they will set up an abomination of desolation. Now, there was a historical fulfillment of that back by Antiochus Epiphanes, but there is yet a future fulfillment that results in the coming of the Messiah and the resurrection. And that's how the angels clearly interpret this. This is both and. This is both a historical interim fulfillment with Antiochus Epiphanes and a future fulfillment at the time of the Antichrist and the second coming of the Messiah. And then again, the Antichrist will seduce with flattery those who will violate the covenant. He's going to bribe people into apostasy, essentially. But the people who know their God will stand firm and they will take action. And the wise among them will make many understand. We talked about that in the last chapter. Though for some time, or for some days, they will stumble by the sword and by flame. Essentially, they're going to be put to death, but they're going to receive a little help. And many will join themselves, many will join themselves to the covenant faithful with flattery, whatever that looks like. I'm not totally sure. But some of the wise will stumble. Maybe they've been entrapped, and so they're being killed because they got entrapped, and they received a bribe, and so they got killed, so that they might be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end. Now we're going to talk about what it means for there to be this refinement, this purification, and being made white at the time of the end. For it still awaits an appointed time. That appointed time now is what's going to be described in Daniel chapter 12. So with that little background, the interpretation continues to unfold, and now we're going to continue talking about that same story, but again, unfolding in the context of the final 7 years of the end of the age, the final 70th week. So at that time, Michael will arise, the great prince who has charge of your people. Michael has been described as this warrior angel, and it's unclear exactly yet what Michael's actions represent. Later biblical authors might give us a little bit more insight into that. We'll come back to that if it does, which I think it does. But at this point, Michael arises sometime during the tribulation for some reason. We don't know exactly all the implications of that yet. It's not revealed in this chapter. We would have to import information from the future that doesn't exist yet, I think. Unless you can think of any chapter that we've covered that would be historically preceding the time of Daniel. Then we might have better insight. And maybe I haven't done a thorough enough search, but I don't think we have that much of a clue of what all is being implied here. I think later chapters that come after Daniel will give us more insight, and so we'll cover them in order as we get to them. And the angel goes on. There will be a time of trouble, such as never has been since there was a nation, meaning the nation of Israel, until that time. And the whole existence of the covenants, essentially. There's never been a time of trouble like what's going to happen during that final 7 years, particularly during the time when the Antichrist is given authority to be aggressive, which is during that final 3.5 years. So we have this false peace treaty that is broken and betrayed, and then we have the final 3.5 years of that terrible tribulation. So the final tribulation is only that last half of the 7th week. The tribulation is not 7 years. The tribulation is the final half of that 7th week, which is triggered when the Antichrist commits an act of betrayal, and desecrates the temple. This is all things we've got from previous authors and what Daniel has seen with the abomination that makes desolation. There will be it's a time of trouble, such as never has been since Israel was a nation until that time. And there are some other cross-references for that. Daniel 7 says that this will be for times, times, and half a time. He will be speaking words against the Most High and will wear out the saints of the Most High and will think to change the times and the law, and they will be given into his hand for 3.5 years. And again, Jeremiah 30, verse 7 says, that day is so great, there's none like it. It's a time of distress for Jacob, yet he will be saved out of it. So we get kind of an elaboration of Jeremiah 30. It's a time of distress, unlike any other, but yet he will be saved out of it. But at that time, your people will be delivered. Everyone whose name is found written in the book. That book is associated with the Lamb's Book of Life, which is described later in other places. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. Those who've been killed and those who've died shall awake, and there's this resurrection. Interestingly, a lot of commentators say it doesn't necessarily mean all. It actually can help us split these resurrections into groups. There's a resurrection into everlasting life, and then there's a resurrection to shame and everlasting abhorrence. The ESV says contempt, but it seems like the better translation is abhorrence. Essentially, covenant curse and punishment. So again, we have many these two resurrections that are described. And again, we say two resurrections because it's really clearly outlined later in the New Testament that there will be two resurrections. And just because he says many doesn't necessarily mean at one time. It might mean there are groups. There's a group resurrected to everlasting life and to everlasting contempt in the second group. And those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Now, in context, this verse 3 very clearly seems to be in reference to the resurrection. Those who are wise will shine. They are included in that resurrection. And so we're still most likely talking about resurrection in this context. Some people suggest perhaps that this could be a reference to the transformation of righteous survivors who are alive at the time that the Messiah descends, being transformed into their immortal forms, which is commonly known as the rapture. That could be, but at best, that is being imported. That's an imported idea that's being inferred kind of onto the text. And it's not the explicit intent of what the angel is describing, because in context, we're talking about resurrection, not about rapture necessarily. And I just want to point out too, before we move on, that even if you did import the rapture into Daniel 12 verse 3, that still is after the time of trouble. The Messiah is coming, and the time of all of this deliverance and all of this resurrection happens at the time after the time of trouble, when those 3.5 years are over. The Lord sends the Messiah, he descends, and he punishes the Antichrist, and there's this great deliverance, and at that time, there's resurrection. And so if you're going to import the rapture into this point, which you could make the argument that you could. I just, again, still, for safety, and just not, since we don't really see that clearly in the text that this is the rapture, that I'll just leave that aside. But still, even if you did, you're still placing it after the time of trouble. I think that's interesting because a lot of people who insist that this is the rapture still are inconsistent with the timing that Daniel describes. So I think they're inconsistent with what Daniel's describing. And not only that, they're inconsistent with when Daniel is describing it happening. Anyway, that's why I just leave that out. We have a lot better passages to talk about the rapture. And so I just leave it out of verse 3 and leave it to the passages that really describe it more clearly. And then you may be able to use Daniel 3 as a sort of reinforcement, but still it's a pretty loose one. Another possible interpretation for verse 3 might involve the glorification of mortal Jewish survivors who are unsaved, who are described as shimmering with light. They actually resonate with the light of their Messiah as Jews, as Jewish survivors. Though still, that is something imported into this passage. But Isaiah 60 says, "Behold, darkness will cover the earth, a thick darkness, the people, but the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will be seen on you." Literally, the Jewish survivors at that time who are being regathered are glowing with the glory of the Lord as they are returning to Jerusalem, and they're not resurrected. They're still mortal. And that's interesting. Micah chapter, there's going to be more, we can talk about that with later biblical authors as well. And then Micah chapter 5, the remnant of Jacob will be in the midst of many peoples like the shimmering dew of the Lord. And I even think Psalm 68 comes to my mind. I didn't put this one in the notes, so because I did that, I'll go ahead and pull this up. Psalm 68 has this wings of doves that are shimmering with silver, covered with silver and shimmering gold. It's interesting. This is thought to be freed captives who have been set free from Basra, who are returning to Jerusalem behind their Messiah, who have this shimmering appearance, and they're not resurrected. Especially at that point, they're not resurrected. So at least it seems, maybe they are, maybe we just missed it, but it seems like they're still mortal. So I don't know, it could be all that to say, there's a little bit of a layer of interpretation that's being imported onto verse 3 if we make that assumption, when clearly it seems like the context is the resurrection. But you, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many will run to and fro, and knowledge will increase. Now, interestingly, with verse 4, the angel instructs Daniel to preserve the vision for the benefit of a future generation when the vision will be fulfilled. In that generation, many will seek the knowledge contained in this vision, and God will grant knowledge to those who orient themselves to understand it. Many are going to need prophetic insight. They're going to need discernment, and they're going to need to orient themselves to the biblical narrative. How do we do that? Now, for a big reason, this is a big reason why we're doing Seeking Shalom, is because we want to help. In times as the biblical narrative continues to unfold and many are seeking to understand, we want to help their knowledge increase. We want to help them orient themselves to the biblical narrative and understand what's unfolding in their generation, and help them be oriented to it and respond accordingly. So here, Daniel describes many seeking understanding as the biblical narrative unfolds, as the end of the age unfolds, and they're running to and fro. They're seeking understanding of, Lord, what are you doing, and how do I orient myself and stabilize myself? But he says, he promises knowledge will increase. He promises to give his people understanding, and a big part of where that understanding comes from, he says, it comes from Daniel's visions. And that's an important reason why we take time to study Daniel, and why we're taking time to do this whole study at all. Why we're doing Seeking Shalom is because we want to be people who understand. We want to be people who are wise and who can instruct and help many, because we've oriented ourselves to the biblical narrative. We've understood how it's unfolding in our generation, and we are acting on it. And in verse 10, the angel goes on to describe them again. Many will purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked will act wickedly, and the wicked won't understand. But those who have oriented themselves, those who've prepared themselves, those who have resolved to be oriented to the biblical narrative, to be messengers of it, to be a prophetic witness in that day, those ones will be wise and will receive greater understanding in that day. Oh, that's exactly my prayer and exactly why we're doing this study. Getting into verses 5 through 7, it seems like he sees this vision of these angels on either side of a river. It's not clear exactly what that river is. Some say it could be the Euphrates or the Tigris or the whatever. Anyway, there's this question that again is asked for Daniel's benefit. Just like in Daniel 8:13, they say, how long shall it be until the end of all these wonders? Really, till the end of that desolation, till the end of the Antichrist time. And just as in Daniel 7, the tribulation is listed as a time, times, and half a time, which is 3.5 years. That's also often considered to be 42 months. It's 3 years and 6 months, 42 months. And that's going to matter here in a moment because John the Apostle in the book of Revelation says a time, times, and half a time, times, and half a time, that 3.5 years is equivalent to 42 months or 1,260 days is like the exact interpretation of that. But the angels here are going to reference something additional to that. So I heard a man clothed in linen who was above the waters in the stream. He raised his hands and he swore by the God of heaven, right? A time, times, and half a time. And swore that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things will be finished. So that's the marker of the end. From the time of the Antichrist betrayal to the time when the Antichrist power is shattered and it comes to an end, that's the time that the 3.5 years will be finished. I heard and I did not understand this. And I said, "O Lord," he's seeking further understanding. And funny enough, the angel says, "Go your way, O Daniel, because all this further understanding is going to be shut up and sealed for that later generation, going to be revealed at a later time." And so Daniel's puzzled, and it seems like they're not going to give him so much of what he wants to know because even that knowledge is going to be reserved for that later generation. And then he goes on to talk about that generation. He says, many in that time are going to purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined. So they're going to be the ones who are remaining loyal to the covenant, and they're going to resolve to endure in the face of the tribulation. But the wicked will act wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand, but those who set themselves to be oriented to the covenant, who set themselves to understand your visions. In that day, the Lord's going to give them greater understanding. We want to be that kind of people. And again, another big reason why we're doing this study, why we're doing Seeking Shalom and studying all these chapters is because we want to be among those who are purified, who have been made ready, and who have been refined, and who will be wise and help people understand. But the angel does go on to provide a little bit more insight, showing him a little bit more about the length of the tribulation until the defeat of the Antichrist. Now remember, John the Apostle will later clarify the length of a time, times, and half a time to be 1,260 days or 42 months. But the angel here says from the time when the regular burnt offerings are taken away and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there will be 1,290 days. There's an additional 30 days. Now, what are these additional 30 days in Daniel chapter 12? Well, the most appropriate interpretation seems to be the one that's most commonly suggested, involves accounting for the length of time that elapses from the time that the Messiah descends at the 1260th day, and then the time that it takes for the Messiah to approach Jerusalem, free the captives, and then defeat the Antichrist at the final battle. That all of that may be that additional 30 days when the battle is won and the Antichrist is fully defeated. So there's kind of a process. There's a traveling process of the Messiah coming out of heaven, setting captives free, approaching Jerusalem, and completing that final battle. Could be that 30 days. Maybe. Because that would be the time then when the Antichrist is fully defeated. But then there's another 45 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335th day. So another 45 days, which is often assumed to involve the time of regathering. Maybe that time of covenant renewal in the wilderness outside Jerusalem. Or it could be the time leading up to the inauguration ceremony of the Messianic age. But Anyway, the exact interpretation of those 45 days is not completely certain. Later biblical authors might help us understand it, but it seems likely that we have the Messiah being sent from heaven at the 1260th day. We have his procession, setting captives free, and then the final battle, pouring out the bowl judgments as we've come to know them until the 1290th day. And then we have this process of regathering for covenant renewal that takes place over those 45 days, possibly leading to the inauguration ceremony on that 45th day, who knows. But anyway, that's kind of the guess, that there's kind of a regathering process for covenant renewal in that 45 days afterward. We'll come back to it, revisit those timelines as we look at later biblical authors who are going to describe, their own perspective of the timeline as well. And then finally, lastly, the angel assures Daniel that he will have his place among the resurrected when the vision is fulfilled. But go your way until the end, and you will rest, meaning you're going to pass away. You're going to die with this unfulfilled, but you will stand in your allotted place at the end of the days among the resurrected, which is a pretty amazing thing to hear. Just especially with Daniel at this point being into his 80s. He's got to be well into his 80s by this point. And to hear that toward the end of his life, I think is remarkable. And it's believed then that Daniel lived out the rest of his days in what was then, Persia, what would be Persia. And that concludes Daniel.